So let me just talk to you a little bit first about the assessment, because I think one of the great problems we face globally at the moment is that people have a very inadequate understanding of what's actually taking place. And I'm going to talk for a few minutes, but I'm more than happy for you to interrupt me if you want with a question or to hang on to questions till the end. That's up to you. Okay. We've got to understand the threat if we're going to resist it strategically. So let's talk about what's been happening. Well, in March 2020, we were told there was a virus that was threatening the human population with a rather serious infection that had a high chance of leading to your death. And in response to that threat of a virus, we were told we needed to submit to a certain range of measures around social distancing and lockdowns and wearing face masks and so on. And ultimately, of course, that was superseded, or, in many contexts, those sort of restrictions were superseded by the introduction of a vaccine. And depending on the country, as you well know, they're basically being made more or less compulsory, often in violation of national constitutions and national laws, and certainly in violation of Nuremberg principles. If you investigate and to search for documented scientific proof that the virus exists, there is none. There are a great many documents that have been published that purport to prove that the virus exists, and each of those has been exposed to be a fraud. In other words, that particular document does not constitute valid scientific proof of the existence of a virus. And a researcher called Christine Massey in Canada has written to health and science institutes all around the world and asked them to supply her with proof that that health institute or that science institute has isolated a virus and therefore demonstrated its existence. She's had about 200 replies in the past 15 months, and each of those replies has said, we do not have evidence of isolation of a unique virus that's pathogenic. There's also, you may be aware, plenty of scientific evidence that there's no such thing as a pathogenic virus, but we won't bother to go with that when we don't need to tonight. The point is, there's no such virus as SARS-CoV-2, therefore there is no disease such as COVID-19. However, if we then go a bit deeper and say, okay, well, if they're running this narrative to try and, implement these controls over what's actually going on. And of course, one of the things you've no doubt heard of long ago is that the World Economic Forum is promoting what it's calling the Great Reset. And this Great Reset, if you look on the World Economic Forum website, outlines changes they intend to impose on the human population in about 200 areas of human life. So most people, if you ask to say, okay, could you nominate 200 areas of human life? They'd say, well, I'll give you 20 if you give me 5 minutes and I'll think about it. They have quite detailed plans in 200 areas of human life. So it's everything from health and transportation to agriculture and so on. The key areas in which they're intending to make these changes are probably political, economic, social, and technological. What's not advertised but is actually quite clear from the documentation if you read the website, it's hours of reading, but well worth spending the time if you want to really understand what they're doing to us. They intend to really shift power from ordinary people to elite agents, and that's obviously the key political intention. The economic intention is to shift the bulk of what's left of the world's wealth from ordinary people to the elite and its agents. Socially, obviously, they've inflicted enormous damage on the human population, and that's been measured by the fact that kids very young have been forced to wear masks, so very slow at learning to pick up facial cues from their parents, and there's obviously been a vast number of other things, but the net outcome has been that it's actually caused a severe rupture in human relationships. And I'm sure most of you have the experience of members of the family who have a very different view of what's taking place to you. And so, like most of us, you've got the experience of being separated, what's the word, ideologically, if you like, but it obviously has emotional ramifications from spouses, from parents, from kids, from friends, and wider members of your own family. And so I've, for example, got two parents. One's 99, my father's 99, my mother's 98. They've both been jabbed 4 times. And, for a year and a half, I wasn't even able to see them, despite the fact that their age, I try to see them as often as I can. And other members of my family have been jabbed as well. So this social rupture, obviously, I get on well with my parents, I'm lucky, but it's not so easy with other members of my family or friends, of course, that I've had in the past. So there's been this massive rupture socially, and then the fourth area is in technology, which I want to come back and talk about in a bit more detail. So if we look at the overall intention of the Great Reset, it's very obvious that the aim of this Great Reset, with all its components, is to kill off a substantial proportion of the human population. Now, I know, for many people that sounds like a fairly outrageous claim when you look at it up front, but the evidence, I think, is quite overwhelming. With the imposition of the compulsory vaccines, as most of you know, a great number of people took the vaccine because it meant they could keep their job, or it meant they could have some role in the community that they valued, and they took it under duress, but they took it for the sake of what they saw as their community. However, the statistics on deaths and serious injury from the vaccines are astronomical, and there's several reports that are already documenting over millions killed and certainly many millions injured. And this is even from official sources where, if you like, we can't argue with the fact that these adverse events have been reported. Secondly, beyond the vaccine death and injury toll, there's been obviously tremendous disruption to the economy, and that's had a couple of outcomes that are particularly heinous. One has been enormous disruption to supply chains, meaning that particularly, say, in relation to food, you've had farmers not able to work their land or not get the labour they needed to do it, perhaps not get the parts for tractors, whatever. And as a result of that, the food's not coming into the distribution centres, perhaps where it's processed or the grain stored or whatever. Factories where food is processed, again, short of labour, short of parts. Again, transport between, point of production and the processing centres interrupted. And then the same thing from points of processing to, outlets for resale in, supermarkets and food stores generally have also been disrupted. So that the problem has been that with the lockdowns and so on, all of the entire supply chain for food has been disrupted, and the war in Ukraine, which was deliberately precipitated to make the situation worse, has meant that about 30% of the world's grain supply has been interrupted as well. So I'm not sure where you're up to in Denmark. Perhaps you'll mention that later on prices for food and fuel. Another one adversely impacted. But if they're not already jumping savagely, they're going to jump a lot more. Yeah, okay, thanks for the hint, Pierre. A third means by which they're going to, and obviously, the Food and Agriculture Organization, for example, and other UN agencies involved in the whole food issue have been screaming the alarm really for a good year now, saying that the death toll from the disruption to food supply, particularly to the third world, Africa, Asia, Central South America, is already killing vast numbers of people, and particularly in those who are sort of day labourers, those who survive on the food they get today, the work they get today to buy the food they eat tomorrow. So this disruption of the global economy is already adversely impacting the West, mainly in the form of increased prices and reduced supply, and it's adversely impacting other parts of the world where the food is just no longer available or can't be bought. A third outcome, which is connected to the one I've just mentioned, is just this massive redistribution of wealth that's taking place. So again, clearly one of the things that's happened as part of the shut lockdowns is the fact that small businesses have been forced to close and unable to survive those sort of adversities like the major corporations. Many people have just been starved of the income they need to, whether it's maintain their housing or other financial commitments, and these small businesses just going out of existence, and of course tend to be gobbled up at bargain basement prices by the large corporations. So there's this massive redistribution of wealth taking place, and Oxfam has recently documented that during the pandemic there was one new billionaire created every 30 hours, and in that 30 hours about 1 million people dropped into poverty. So this massive redistribution of wealth is ongoing as was intended.